Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Harper. I am the Assistant Director of Graduate Recruitment for American University's College of Arts and Sciences. Thank you so much for joining us today. This event is part of our Meet the Faculty and Women in Leadership webinar series, which were started in the summer of 2020 to sort of help introduce the AU community to our prospective graduate applicants. Joining me today, I'm very excited to host Dr. Rachel Burks of the Chemistry Department. Just a quick bio. After working in a crime lab, Dr. Burks has returned to academia, teaching, and forensic science research. As an analytical chemist, she enjoys the challenge of developing detection methods for a wide variety of compounds. Dr. Burks is also a popular science communicator, appearing on TV, in podcasts, at large genre cons such as Dragon Con and Geek Girl Con, in addition to writing a science meets true crime column called Trace Analysis for Chemistry World. Lastly, she is a member of a number of local, national, and international committees, task force, and projects that focus on social justice and the STEM field. So, Dr. Burks, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to finally get a chance to meet you.
Yes, thank you.
So I have a few questions I've been very excited to ask you about. And I think the first one is kind of more general. Your profile calls you an analytical chemist. For those of us who are maybe from the literature field, maybe could you tell me what kind of distinguishes an analytical chemist from other chemists?
Sure. So, a lot of folks think chemists, they just make chemicals, which there are a lot that do that. But analytical chemists, we tend not to make chemicals, we tend to find them and to study them. So I like to say that we're the detectives of chemistry. So there are a lot of applications where you're not really interested in making new chemicals, you're trying to locate them. And so, probably what most people are familiar with, especially in a forensic context, is what is this mysterious, red-brown fluid, or, this greenish plant material, or this white crystalline solid, what is it? And white crystalline solid is a great one, because if you think about your kitchen, and I said, bring me a white crystalline solid, you'd have people bringing, sugar, salt, maybe baking soda, right? And granulated sugar versus powdered sugar, right? There'd be a lot of options potentially in a kitchen. Obviously, if it's a forensic application, we probably have a few more things that we might think it is that are not entirely legal, like sugar. So how do you do that? And how do you identify those things, and very quickly? So that would be kind of in the analytical realm. We design instruments and methods to find things. And typically, we want to find things that you can't see, and that obviously it's a real no-no to taste and smell things, right? So that might work in your kitchen because you're fairly confident you can control what's in there. But that's a big, don't do that at a crime scene. Don't do that in the lab, right? So what are some of the ways that we can distinguish, right? Is it sugar? Is it salt? Is it baking soda? Is it, all these things? And you can definitely do that with chemistry. So that's kind of what analytical does, is if you don't know what something is, call it analytical chemist. and they'll let you know.
I love it. Now, I'm kind of glad you mentioned the crime labs, because I know I'm fascinated with this background in crime labs. And I'm just curious, what attracted you to that field?
It was the first time. So back in junior high, when I first became familiar with forensic science, it was really the first time that science seemed useful to me. And that's just because I just had a real disconnect. Sometimes as a kid, you don't know, what is actually behind everything, right? You just kind of like, I don't see the point. Like, what is the science stuff useful for? It's kind of like, even now people will say, like, what am I going to use this math for? And of course I use math all the time. And not just to, do personal finance, right? Like, my research is very math dependent, but chemistry and science in general, I didn't get what it was, the applied usage
Mhm.
right? And so not until I saw this demo involving forensic science
Mhm.
when I realized, oh, so science is like super applicable to the real world. This is like when I was 12 years old. And so, and I grew up in a space shuttle era,
Yeah.
but like space just seemed like, why are we spending all that money? I was like this cynical kid, I don't know. But once I understood that, you know, these advances and the types of things that we're able to do,
Yeah.
they trickle down in some ways to this just everyday uses, right? So
Mhm.
and now I know, right? The basic research, and basic doesn't mean easy. Basic means like so far removed from applied, like theoretical, foundational, observational, that you need all of that in order to get to applied. So a lot of this, the investment that was made in the space industry in the 50s, 60s, and 70s are why we have computers today, which is why you have a cell phone that has more computing power than all of NASA in 1967. And it's why you have, you know, flat screen televisions, and you know, we have GPS and like all, you know, all of these things. And so now, of course, I have a healthy respect for it, but at the time it was the first time I'd seen science as being it was so embarrassed to say that now, because it's just like, wow. But it was used to help people, right? It was either it could get people out if they were wrongly convicted, like an innocence project kind of a deal. But it could also resolve, right, some conflicts or some unknowns. And you really saw that in forensic science in a way that's immediate, right? You see almost in the near immediate kind of impact. And we still see that, right, as time has gone on. So that's kind of, and it's my first science love, and it's definitely stayed a love.
That's so funny because I have so many of my friends who will talk about the Scully effect from X-Files.
Oh,
Like
right.
Dana Scully was
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
entry point, like women in science, let's go.
Yep.
We're going to
Yes.
join the FBI and
Yeah.
uncover aliens. Um,
Ooh, boy, were they in for a shock.
I know.
What a disappointment.
Now, I guess one other question I have, it's kind of more of a general question, but you know, the term forensic science, which again has a lot of pop culture associations with it. So, you know, what is that technical definition?
You know, forensic science is just the application of science to the law.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be criminal. Actually, a lot of forensic science is civil, like accident reconstruction, or whose fault is this, you know, failure, this, you know, this thing. And of course, we I think, especially in with all the crime shows, right, the NCIS and the and even the X-Files, you know, you know it from like the criminal,
Yeah.
right, kind of angle. But a lot of it is also in the civil kind of realm, and a lot of it actually is wildlife related. And a lot of people don't know this, but like wildlife crime is right up there with drug trafficking and weapons trafficking. It's wildlife and animal trafficking is like right up there. So one of the most like productive, famous forensic laboratories is Fish and Wildlife. It's U.S. Fish and Wildlife. They have a really, really great lab that deals with wildlife crime, but also just tracking species so we can see, okay, what's going extinct, what's not, which might actually be more of an environmental impact. So there's a lot of interdisciplinary things. So the law could be more about policy, could be an environmental thing, could be a criminal thing, could be a civil thing, but somehow you're using science to communicate some kind of a finding, and then some other set of people is going to make a decision. The scientists just show up and like do geeky stuff, and then we leave.
Well, then what are some of the specific things an analytical chemist is doing in one of these labs? I mean, specifically a crime lab. I know that's
Sure.
where you have your background.
Yeah. So, you know, you could go in a lot of directions. A strong analytical background means that, you know, you could be really comfortable with a lot of different instrumentation and techniques. So there's analytical chemists working in, say, you know, the toxicology/drug section, where you would have a lot of samples that people think are what are called scheduled drugs. The Drug Enforcement Agency has a bunch of drugs that are scheduled based on medical use, right? And so if you're like a Schedule 1, there's quote, no accepted medical use, like heroin. And then it also means like, ooh, you don't have any reason to have this, right? And so that's the real problem. So, but is it heroin or is it aspirin, which you have every legal right to? So like chemically being able to identify and prove that and do that analysis is really critical. But also you might be doing chemical processing of prints. So people are familiar with a lot of the, using fingerprint powder, but you can also do super glue fuming, which would be more of a chemical process. You might stain that with a fluorescent, like these behind me are fluorescent dyes. You might stain something with the fluorescent dye so it's easier to see and photograph. And then there's also analytical chemists that do forensic genetics, so all the forensic DNA typing, because that's a lot of biochemistry. So it's a lot of, kind of the analytical sample preparation. You're doing a separation, which is definitely an analytical thing. And then there's a lot of statistical analysis. So those would be, really two big areas. And then also a section, it's called trace analysis, which is like, if you don't think it's DNA and you don't think it's drugs, then it's something else, right? And that everything else goes to the trace people. And the trace people are going to then try to figure out, here's like the true unknown. And then they're going to do a bunch of things to figure out, well, what is it? Right. And it might turn out to be like, oh, it's not blood, it's cosmetics, it's lipstick, right? Like, and all of those types of things. So those would be like the big three that somebody with a chemistry or an analytical biochemistry background would be in.
Well, and what other training goes into those kind of like careers and skill sets? I mean, obviously having a background in chemistry or biochemistry is the necessary foundation work, but what other things do people need to be doing for those careers?
So yeah, you're going to want a good statistics or math background. There's a lot of stats and kind of data analysis in there. And that might come in with the major. So a lot of, if you were to major in biology or genetics, especially, is that they're not considered separate. It's woven right in, because when you talk about, how likely a certain haploid is or genotype or phenotype, you have to give it a probability, right? And so really feeling comfortable with stats. And we do a lot of data analysis and analytical too, like what's the likelihood of a match or a classification. So, get really comfortable with the math, make it your friend. I love math. I think it frustrates me, but I love it. So lots of math, but also you do a lot of writing and you do a lot of reporting. So it's really necessary too, to have a strong literature writing background. So there's, technical writing, but also, you can't go wrong with a good, basic writing and rhetoric class. And feeling comfortable with that, but also then technical writing is a bit different. So if you have an opportunity to take a technical writing class, that will give you a really good experience. And then, of course, if you work in a lab, you're likely going to have to go to court and testify. So being comfortable giving oral presentations that can be quite technical, but then have to be delivered to a general audience, because you might be delivering that information to a jury who probably doesn't have your degree, right, or experience or education, but you have to deliver this information concisely and correctly and all of that. The jury, then you have attorneys, and you have the judge, right? So feeling comfortable doing that, and getting that experience, so public speaking, and having good practice with that, all of your kind of presentation skills and reporting skills. So that's why I think, a good liberal arts education, taking advantage of those opportunities, even when you major in chemistry, you get the opportunity to take writing and rhetoric. You're going to have to do reports in a variety of different classes. And of course, you can't get out of a BS without giving an oral presentation at some time, probably more than one. And you want to really take advantage of those opportunities. But then when you get to the job, there is a lot of on-the-job training, because they want to make sure you have kind of the uniform way that place does those things. So those training programs, typically 1 year, an additional year to kind of get up to speed with, their way of doing it, anything. And every employer offers that, right? Like I worked fast food growing up in high school, Carl's Jr.'s. You had to go through a training program.
Yeah.
Now theirs was like a month. But
I'm sorry, you broke up just for a second there.
Every job kind of has one of those. So you would then,
Yeah, you broke
sure,
up for a second there. Could you say that last part again?
Which part?
So after you did the training with fast food, then?
Yeah, so I mean, even if it's a short training, you're always going to have some kind of way to get you kind of to the uniform standard, right? But they are going to expect you to come in with, this background, right? Now we're more training you on our particular instructions rather than all the explanatory stuff. And a lot of labs nowadays, they require a certain type of degree, and they'll even list the classes and the experience down to the minutia, right? Of what, and it's always in there too. You'll see a lot of strong communication and writing skills because of, that's something that they don't show in the shows, which is when people say like, what's the real and what's fake, is you never see people doing paperwork. And that's, writing reports very rarely, unless it's like the boss's boss, that they're always in their office doing paperwork. But I spent at least half of my time writing reports or just extemporaneous notes while I was doing the analysis. And you never see those on the show. They never seem to write anything down when they're at a crime scene, when they're in the lab. Like, who knows? Who's keeping records? No one knows, right? So being really methodical and, diligent in your reporting. And it's not, I mean, I like it. So when I say maybe it's not exciting, but you've got to get used to that. And that's why a science, right, degree will help you with that, because when you go and do experiments, right, you should be taking extemporaneous notes in your lab notebook. Yeah. So if you spend 3 or 4 years getting used to that, and by the time, and then graduate school potentially, and then by the time you get in the crime lab, it's not a big leap to do that. So you're going to be really ready to take that level of detail.
Well, I also was really fascinated with some of the research you've been doing specifically. Some of your recent research has been on using smartphones for the detection of explosive chemical agents and illicit drugs, which I think is absolutely fascinating, that you're incorporating a smartphone, and it just kind of makes me wonder about that kind of growing relationship between chemistry and computer technology. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, do chemists now also need to be computer scientists in order to be able to do this?
Well, I don't think you need to be a computer scientist, but I think you definitely need to be comfortable with computation. And, and certainly there are people who double major, there are people who major and minor, but it's just the way we do things now, right? And the fact that the reason why analysis too, is we're able to analyze more samples faster, and our instruments have gotten more powerful, yet also smaller, is because of computation, because the processing speed of which the entire instrument can run, how fast it can collect data. We are seeing things that we've never seen before, not because it's a new phenomenon, but because we actually now have computers fast enough to capture the data, where 50 years ago, we didn't have them that were fast enough to do it. And so you do need to be comfortable with doing computation, because it just makes your workflow, faster. And of course, it's always great to have collaborators that are actual computer scientists, that you'll work with, which is very common, nowadays, and really it's been this way for a long time, is that it's a team effort, and there's a lot of different, expertises that people bring in. And it's definitely common nowadays where if you've got a big project, you're going to have a computer scientist or two on your team, right? Especially with again, you can do so much now, even with statistical analysis. Sure, we've been able to do stuff by hand for a long time, right? Like, I mean, when I think back to all the math that was being done, and code breaking and like the Enigma work with Alan Turing, that was done long form, like by, or hidden figures, right? You're doing this math literally by hand, with some assist from a computer, but really it's human computers that were doing it. But now we can do it with this level of speed, right? That is just unparalleled. But you can't abdicate responsibility to the computer. The computer is only as good as the program, and the program is only as good as the person that wrote it.
Yeah.
And at some point, if you want, and you often do as scientists, you want total control and transparency in your work. Is this step working the way that I designed it to? Am I getting the data that I expect based on theory and concepts and the foundational information? Then you are going to want to be intimately involved with the code, which means you have to know how to write it or read it enough so that you'll recognize that's not right, right? Like sometimes the proficiency is just enough to recognize when that seems shady, right? Like that's, and you have to know that, because the one thing that you are not going to be allowed to do is be like, well, it's not my fault, it's the computer. Right? Like, no. The program, the analysis, everything from beginning to end is completely under the control of the analyst, right? And so now that we do so much computation, I mean, even something as basic as like a Gen Chem student, I've done a titration. Yeah, in industry that's an automated thing. Right. And so, but there's still a person that's going to be attached to it that understands the chemistry of it, and it's going to validate the results and be responsible for it. And if something goes wrong and it's not what you expect, then you're going to need to go fix it and check the code and like do the analysis and all of that. So you've got to get comfortable with it. And in a lot of chemistry programs, biochemistry, it depends on exactly kind of what your major and minor is, but you're going to get a lot of experience with the types of programs like R, like Python, Mathematica and MATLAB. You're going to get opportunities to get, well, really it would be like free training, but training not only in the classroom and with assignments, but oftentimes if you join a research group, then you're going to get a really in-depth look at it. So to me, it's kind of like asking somebody 50 years ago, like computer or calculators, what's the deal? Right? Like that, but am I going to have to know how to use one? Right. Well, of course. Right. And so I feel like every generation, they're getting faster now. There's some new technology we have to get more comfortable with in order to, fully realize our job. And in our generation, it's computation, right? To really kind of get comfortable with it. And especially if you're going to really want to be the go-to expert, people are going to expect you to know every single facet of your project. And if your project involves any computation at all, which it will, you're going to need to kind of know enough, right, to make it work.
Now, one thing for your current and future grad students, how closely are they working with you on some of your research?
Oh yeah, we're a team, right? And so if the grad students and the undergraduates, I'm their direct supervisor, and we're working together. Well, right now it's a bit, it's a modified work schedule, but daily contact, whether it's virtual or 6 feet away in the lab with masks. But yeah, it's a constant, especially graduate students, right? Because there's some classwork, but really the focus is on developing especially for a master's student, your mastery over the concepts, but also really your mastery of doing research and directing a project and really advancing that and making significant progress. And so my job, of course, would be to help provide training, not only in the chemistry, but in how to manage your product, your project and your time and how to present. And so it's a career development along with the research development. So yeah, you work together. It's very different than a classroom environment, right? Where you might see a professor a couple of times a week for like an hour each time. But when, you know, a person is your research advisor, it's quite likely you'll see them dozens of hours a week or more, and you'll be in between work hours, you'll be in near constant contact, checking in with Slack, with base camp. You know, there's some groups that have group chats on the WhatsApp, and, you know, just communicating back and forth about results, about data analysis, because two teams tend to, while people have independent parts of their project, oftentimes, especially big projects, right, they involve several people, and you're doing this part and this person's doing this part. So there's a lot of collaboration that occurs between students and the supervisor. So it really is a team sport. And so, you know, you got to be, another big skill to develop is how to be a contributing, thoughtful, you know, engaging team member. It's not a solo endeavor. Even, you know, computational chemists that don't ever go into the lab, that are all theoretical. A lot of programming, including that in my group, is actually collaborative, right? When you know, there's a whole structure of thing like team programming or pair programming, where you have it written and you're getting editing and assistance in real time. It's a team effort to do it. And so I think some folks, there's still a stereotype that scientists are not social or kind of awkward or like not good with people. And that's not been my experience. You know, it's because it's such a team endeavor. And now there might be introverts and extroverts, but there's so many people that you're working on these big collaborative projects that, yeah, you gotta learn, you know, continue to learn. I remember kindergarten, play nicely with others, you know, that has not changed.
Well, does that mean there's also room for collaboration between different academic programs? Is it possible
Oh
for you to
yeah.
be running this chemistry program, but have a computer science student or a
Yes.
biochemist? Or
Yeah. In fact, I'm hoping to recruit some data science folks. That's the new program, a new center at AU. Because, you know, a lot of times, again, it's, you don't look at numbers and try to find relationships between them. And I think it would be great, you know, because chemists have a very packed curriculum. That's why computer scientists have a very packed curriculum. And that's why it would be, you know, my group, we tend to have people that have those complementary skill sets and they can learn off of each other. But yeah, I would be very open, especially with different projects I work on. There is a theme that we have, which is a lot of it's some kind of sensing, right? We do a lot of sensing and analytical things, but we have applications in forensics, we have applications in agriculture, we have applications in kind of drug development. And so having folks, you know, from computer science, potentially from, you know, I work with a collaborator that's plant biology, have another collaborator that is a biochemist that does drug development for leukemia. Totally not, I don't at least half the time, no. but right, like that's why, like, what's the complementary skill set and how can we, you know, have a mutual benefit? Because it is impossible. Like, as much as I love NCIS, you know, the original NCIS with like an Abby Shudo, where you have, or like a Gil Grissom, where you have someone who literally knows everything about everything. That's not real.
right.
Right. If you have an expertise, that is your sole focus and you know it in and out, but you aren't also an expert in entomology, anthropology, like, you know, like you have to be very, very focused. And that's why having these collaborators and having a group of different expertises can really take a project to the next level, and everyone benefits from that. And so you'll see a lot of groups, especially at the graduate level, between faculty and between the graduate students. That's how the collaborations, a lot of collaborations are, yes, they are actually driven by faculty, but a lot of them are driven by collaborations between graduate students. because, they come in as a cohort together, and one of them's talking about their project and the other one's talking their project, and they're just like, hey, right? And then they become drivers, right, of setting up these new collaborations. And so I know for myself, my collaborator at Michigan, her graduate students talk to my students and they're working on things. And so, yeah, it's a real benefit. I think that I have a lot of collaborations across the STEM disciplines. And within that, math and engineering and things like that. But when I'm doing education research, I often collaborate too with the School of Education and with other scientists, maybe that, like I have a colleague here that's a theoretical physicist. We don't have anything like research wise in common when it comes to our bench science. But when it comes to our education, STEM education research, here's where we can collaborate and work together on those things, right? And bring in folks from education, but also our colleagues in the library, talking about certain guidebooks and ways to deliver new educational content in different paradigms. So there's a lot of opportunities there.
That's fantastic. I have one last question for you, because I was excited to find this as well. You founded DIY Cyzone at Geek Girl Con, and
Yes.
would you mind talking a little bit about this group?
Sure. So Geek Girl Con is a genre con like New York City Comic Con or San Diego Comic Con. There's also like Sakura Con, there's real specialty ones. And so Geek Girl Con is focused on the achievements of women and girls, all types of women and girls in sci-fi, genres, literature and comic books and TV, all sorts of things, and also science. Because what we definitely know is that science and sci-fi are like peanut butter and jelly, right? Like you'll meet a lot of scientists that, there's a lot of crossover there. And so at that particular zone too, at that conference, which, when the last time we didn't have it this year in person, we did a virtual con, is when it was in person, usually it's about 10 to 12,000. So much smaller than San Diego, which is like over 100,000, but still a pretty, good turnout. Lots of families, lots of women and girls. I mean, everyone's welcome. But so about 9 years ago, I started the Do-It-Yourself Science Zone, so the DIY Cyzone. And that was a space that participants could go and do some experiments and learn a bit of science. So there was a gaming zone where you would go and play like the latest games from EA or, the latest tabletop games, but they also had an area where there was just a box of stuff and you could build your own game. So there was always a build your own game. And then, a lot of times people would design these elaborate role-playing games, or you could make a board game. I mean, you could do anything you wanted, right? It was just, you could do whatever you wanted. It was the build your own game zone. So I said, we need one of these, but science. And so I came up with Do-It-Yourself Science Zone. And so it's a place where there's typically about 10 to 12 stations, and they're all peopled by experts, they're scientists, science educators that allow people to come in and learn whatever this thing is. So I know I've done one on like, certain fingerprinting techniques, and other people have done. Great one that was really popular was mummification. We had an anthropologist, biological anthropologist who's kind of a mummy expert, show people how to actually mummify. That was very, very popular. Like what the process is, what does it mean when something's a mummy? And so we always have the bug chicks. They're super popular entomologists. What's the difference between a millipede and a centipede? And they have them, so you can look and see, right? They always bring like a tarantula named Beyonce, the latest tarantula, and very cute. No dance skills, but you can go around to each station and you can learn a bit of science, have some fun, spend 5 minutes, spend 10 minutes, and so just a place, kind of a, that was, I believe it was the first con to have that kind of a science zone. And then it got picked up. Dragon Con which is closer to 90,000 attendees, then they started doing it too. We helped them set one up. And so it's just a great place that people, you know, these are all passionate people that want to learn things, whether it's about their fandom, you know, or whatever it is. And so of course they're going to be interested if you say, hey, do you want to go blow something up on a very small scale, very tiny scale, or do you want to go, you know, make this thing change some weird color? Then of course they're going to say yes. So it's also open to all ages. So we did a virtual one this year. So everybody recorded videos. And so people could do kind of kitchen chemistry, right? So fun stuff that you can do at home.
Oh, that's fantastic. Dr. Burks, I just want to say first, thank you so much for spending the afternoon. This has been wonderful. And again, this is part of the Meet the Faculty Women in Leadership webinar series run through the Office of Graduate Enrollment. For those of you who are interested, please do check our website out. We will be holding more in the spring semester.